On Mars, there's not much gravity, so you have to pull the feet to break the neck. They let the loved ones do it. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sandra. Today I am so excited to talk about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So about 8 years ago, my dear friend and former colleague told me that Red Rising was his favorite series, and I think the first book came out like in 2013, so 11 years ago. But I think when he had told me that this was his favorite series, the first trilogy had just completed, and so this has been on my TBR for 8 years, and I'm so embarrassed to say that I'm just now getting to the book. But better late than never. I have heard wonderful things from everybody about this series. Most people have mentioned that this is the weakest book in the trilogy. Some people going as far as to say that it's kind of mid, like this one is a very mediocre book and that the next book is so much better than this one. But I honestly loved everything about this book from the very first page. Red Rising is a very fast-paced, twisty, dark and gritty sci-fi fantasy book. There are so many characters and world building things. Even Pierce Brown's writing is just so compelling and snappy, and you're just like flipping through the pages, and before you know it, you're done with the book. It took me like, I don't know, maybe 24 hours to get through this book. I physically could not put this book down. So in this video, I'm going to be giving a spoiler-free overview of Red Rising before I get into the spoilery discussion about specific character stuff and some of my favorite scenes and things like that. But I'll be sure to give you a heads up before I get into that if you have not read Red Rising yet. So here's kind of my spoiler-free summary of Red Rising. So in the future, humans have scattered across the solar system after Earth has become otherwise uninhabitable, or at least that's what the main character is told. And humanity is now divided into what's called different colors. So you have the golds that sit at the very top, and they kind of rule over everybody else, with the reds being at the bottom, which is what the protagonist, Darrow, falls into. And so the golds govern and rule over everybody else, and the reds are kind of like slaves. They do all the hard labor. They are mining on Mars what's called helium-3, which is a key component into terraforming the planets and moons and things like that. And so Red Rising follows 16-year-old Darrow at the start of this book anyways, and he is a Martian helldiver of the Lambda clan, and he's been doing it for about 3 years, since he was 13, and he is the youngest known helldiver at this point. He has very fast reflexes, especially with his fingers and his hands, like twitchy movements, and he's also just really sharp. He can crunch out quick math in his head because he has to do some very dangerous dives into the bowels of Mars and check out gas pockets under the Earth and that kind of thing. One of the incentives for each of the different kind of rival clans is to try and get the most or the biggest helium-3 haul, and then they'll be rewarded what's called the Laurel, which grants them special supplies, food items, that kind of thing. And so the Reds are treated very much like slaves. A lot of them are starving. They don't have much except each other, really. And so family is very important to Reds, and their small community and that type of thing. So hell diving or drilling in general is very dangerous. They go very deep into Mars. There are pit vipers, which are very venomous, huge snake-like creatures. There's the gas pockets, which they can get very hot and blow up. So it's kind of, it's a very dangerous type of labor that no one wants to do, and so these Reds are designated to do that. And I would say at the beginning of this, Darrow is pretty content with his life on Mars. He knows that it could be better, there could be more food on the table, that kind of thing, but he's just kind of a simple guy. He's married to his childhood sweetheart named Io, and she also kind of works in these silk caves with the other women. He is pretty much just content on doing that. He thinks it's honest work, and he kind of has the mindset that as long as he works hard, then he'll be rewarded for that eventually, especially, you know, in the case of the Laurel. But it's through kind of a different series of events that Darrow comes to learn that the system is rigged against him and all of the other Reds, and he's forced onto a path that makes him infiltrate the golds to kind of change how things are. And so it's kind of his journey. And that is about all I can say without spoiling anything else. I will say I'm naturally someone who avoids reading the back cover of the books. I don't like to read synopsis stuff because I find that most times major plot things are given away, and I just like to go into a book completely blind so that I can feel all of the twists and turns viscerally and just be surprised. And so I definitely recommend going into this one completely blind because the back just gives away way too much. I'll also say that I listened to the graphic audio while physically reading this book, and the graphic audio is so amazing. Everyone kind of had like a Scottish accent, I believe, but it kind of helped me with like pronouncing different names and places and things like that. So I definitely recommend the graphic audio. I love graphic audio as far as audiobooks goes. But the book is really about class struggle, slavery, freedom, whether the cost of freedom is worth it, and really just the consequences of oppression, and also like justice versus revenge is a huge theme of the book because of just things that happen, and really just self-identity. You know, when Darrow starts in this book, he's 16 years old, he thinks he knows how the world works and what his, tomorrow is going to look like. And by the end of this book, he has a very different take on it and a very different goal in mind. His journey is so perfect in this book. The world building is incredible. Red Rising is like a sci-fi fantasy type of book, so it has like this really great blend of like medieval type of fantasy elements with some of the things that happen in the book, but also with this whole concept of colonizing space, all of the technology that exists and that kind of thing. So it's really cool. Also, the action scenes in this book are amazing. They were very visual. I read some of John Gwynn's stuff, I've read some of Joe Abercrombie's stuff, and I feel like they write really good action scenes, and this one had like really gritty, dark imagery, and the visuals were really cool in specific scenes that come to the top of my head. But that is about all I can say overview-wise about this book without spoilers, so this is your warning. I am going to get into some spoiler discussion now. Here I go. This book had so many twists and turns. The first one being after Io makes the choice that she is going to be a martyr because that is the only thing that is going to shake Darrow and get him out of his acceptance, very willful acceptance of just being another cog in the wheel for Empire in drilling this helium-3. Her sacrificing herself is what is the catalyst for Darrow getting on the journey that he does. I think it's like close to the end of the first part of this book, Darrow learns that everything that he has learned and been told in life is a lie. He takes a tonic basically that makes him appear dead and is buried and then brought back by this rebellion group called the Sons of Ares. Ares being the god of war. He takes a lift to the very top and he finds that Mars is already thriving. There's already a thriving city there, a very technological city. In fact, it has been that way for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there are these people, these Reds, living underground, doing this hard labor with the understanding that what they're doing is going to enable someday for humans to be able to live on the surface of Mars whenever it's been happening for hundreds of years already. He comes to this shocking realization that the society has been lying to him all this time. And so that's kind of the first twist and turn. This is where the book started feeling like a combination of different other sci-fi things to me. I definitely got some Silo vibes from this because if you've seen that adaptation, which is based on books, it very much is like there's these people underground that do their work hoping that one day the world above ground will be safe enough for them to be able to inhabit again. And so they're underground preserving knowledge and working and all this stuff. But also there's a lot in parallel with like the Expanse, and there's these groups of people called the Belters who live in the belt, and they kind of are treated like shit, and they do all this work with mining like ice and things like that. And then there's Foundation, which is also based on books, and that one, like Red Rising, is very much a Roman Empire inspired system. So you have these golds at the top who are very Roman in their stature and their names. They kind of look to that Roman era as like the epitome of human civilization and art and physique and strength and that kind of thing. There was one scene in particular when Mickey starts working on Darrow to physically change him through surgery and different processes like that into a gold. And it reminded me of the Matrix, how they plug in and they're able to download all this information and immediately know how to do something. So there's one scene where Darrow takes this tonic that is like a learning enhancer, And overnight, he's able to learn like 3,000 years of literature, legal code, and history. So he wakes up with all of that knowledge so that he can get more on like a kind of an intelligence level of the golds. And he's also, his physique is changed. He is broadened. His body is strengthened. He's made to have big muscles, be really big and tall. His hair and eye color changed. That was something that kind of reminded me like flashes of Fifth Element, because when I think of Fifth Element, I think of like bright colors and very ostentatious fashion and that kind of thing. And so that the way the golds and silvers and pinks and reds are described, with like their hair being a shade of red and their eyes having red in it and gold, you know, etc., etc. I just think of like in Fifth Element how she had her bright fiery orange hair and different people looked differently. So I kept like picturing that kind of brightness and like clear contrast of the different social levels in that way. And then really Red Rising, like, even though we're following a 16-year-old, this book does not shy away from the violence. There's like rape stuff happening. There's brutal fight scenes and a lot of war tactics and strategy and that kind of thing. So despite it following a 16-year-old, it very much felt like a grown-up book. I think the most YA type of thing about this book is just the pacing, because that's something YA books excel at, is having very punchy, very snappy pacing. And this book was perfectly paced. I didn't find any parts that dragged on. I got to sit with different characters for like the perfect amount of time, and I just thought everything about the pacing of the book was perfect. I think the heart of this book feels so much like a mixture of Gladiator and Spartacus, because Spartacus, you had this small guy that takes it upon himself to lead this huge rebellion that is really about ending slavery and everyone gaining their freedom, and that's very much what the soul of this book felt like, with love kind of being the catalyst behind that, and the loss of love being the catalyst behind that. And so after Darrow finds out that the world is not what he was always told, and how, you know, humans have been still living on Earth, they're living on the moon, they're living on Mars, they're everywhere. Mars has been a very thriving city for centuries now. And so he has to like come to terms with that and like kind of navigate his way through the world in that way. But also he has to learn how to carry himself. So he goes through physical exams, he goes through different written exams, and basically what these exams do is they test his personality and his competency in different things. So it's able to tell, you know, what some of his character flaws might be. So I think there's a quote where it says that his rashness or impulse control is very lacking, but he also scores really high in loyalty. And then, you know, part of the rashness and impulse is he also scored high in like rage. And we do see the rage play out. He's constantly holding himself back in different situations that anger him, or when there's some kind of injustice happening, we do see himself holding out. Or, you know, like he'll just be completely blinded by rage and just kind of go overboard. And so we do see those instances happen a lot, and it just made him so interesting. I think the important thing to remember about his rage is, in order for him to fit into this society, he has to carry himself like a prince in a way, and he has to be very politically correct, and he can't rip people apart in conversation or be too boastful or belittle other people, because then it's kind of looked at him not having any self-restraint. And you see things like even the way they eat, leaving 20% of their meal on the plate. They're expected to have the kind of restraint to not be a slave to their tongue, their taste buds. And so it kind of speaks to just how this society is in general too. Like, they're a little frivolous in the way that they're wasteful. This plan with this rebellion group, the Sons of Ares, is Darrow is expected, he's like the 100th person. There have been tons of people before him that have tried to infiltrate the Golds and take down this whole system from the inside out. And so Darrow, after he undergoes this physical and mental kind of transformation, then he has to get into the Institute, which is essentially an institution meant to destroy the humanity of the kids, because they are, 16-year-olds. This institute is meant to break their humanity and turn them into monsters in a way so that they are okay with this idea of ruling over other people and treating them like garbage and being okay with this concept of enslavement. Where a few more twists happen, like all of the characters in this book are so good. We have, we're first introduced to like Cassius, who has a twin brother named Julian, who is kind of the more petite, more empathetic version of him. And we meet Antonia and Titus, and then there's Priam, and there's a poet named Roque, and Sevro, who is probably one of my favorite characters outside of Darrow. And even Darrow's name, so there's so much meaning in the names of this book. If I hadn't listened to the graphic audio of this book, I wouldn't have known that there was like a Scottish kind of influence in the characters. The name Darrow in Scottish means like an oak tree, which I just have to read this part, but oak symbolizes strength, endurance, power, and ancient wisdom. The oak tree's strong roots penetrate deeply into the earth, anchoring it firmly in place. Like the backbone of the earth, its trunk rises tall and proud, branching out into a canopy of leaves that provide shelter and protection to all those beneath it. That's very much a symbolic representation of who Darrow is, except, you know, instead of him being this tree rooted very deeply in earth, he's literally living in the subterranean levels of Mars when the book begins, and family and his wife Io are very, very important things to him. And then he grows into this very Spartacus-like character, and that other people are learning to respect him and look up to him as a true leader. And so he becomes this reluctant, he starts out as this reluctant character in the beginning and becomes like this very strategic leader by the end of it. Even Io, meaning like dawn after Eos, you think of her death becoming like this rebirth for Darrow in a way. She is the catalyst for him undergoing this new journey, this new beginning. Her name is very symbolic that way as well. One was like Mickey, which in Hebrew is like a god-like character, and Mickey even talks about himself being like God in creating, like when he's Frankensteining Darrow essentially. And so you have that kind of parallel as well. There's just so much meaning in the names, and you know, even the sons of Ares, these people are bringing war to the Golds. One of the hardest parts to watch in the beginning, besides, you know, Eos dying, is the passage, which was this unknown step of being enrolled essentially in the institute that everyone has to go through. And so they're basically assigned to one person that they have to fight to the death to be able to move on to the next thing in the institute. And Darrow is pitted against Cassius's twin Julian, who has been nothing but nice and civilized to him. It's awful. He spends the book lying to Cassius about it and letting other people kind of take the fall for Julian's death, and it ends up biting him in the ass. There's a scene, you know, talking about Darrow's rage, where Cassius finds out that Darrow had been lying about it the whole time and let him think it was Titus who killed his brother. I have to read the quote because this was just so telling. Page 260 to 261. So Cassius stabs Darrow. Darrow says, "So what would you have me do? Should I have let Julian kill me in the passage? Would you?" That freezes him. It's how you killed him. He's quiet for a moment. "We come as princes, and this school is supposed to teach us to become beasts. But you came a beast." And so this is when Cassius watches a holocan, like video recording of Darrow killing his twin brother, and it was horrifically violent. And so that's why Cassius is unable to forgive Darrow, and it just makes it that much horrible because a sort of rage came over Darrow when he was killing Julian too. And not a rage directed at Julian, but a rage at, I think, Io's actions in sacrificing herself and putting him on this path that he wanted nothing to do with, and also rage at this institute and even the society in general, that he's in this place where he has to murder this innocent person that he otherwise liked very much. And so we see him suppress his rage time and time again throughout the book. One of the things that I'm looking forward to in the next book, Golden Sun, is to see if he ever reaches a tipping point with having to suppress his rage so much, like if it just comes out like a volcanic eruption. But this book, there was, I would say, a ton of war tactic and strategy. There's one part where all of the remaining 16-year-olds or however old they are put onto ground. They're given different castles and different geographical locations with different supplies and resources, and they're expected to beat out the other teams. They earn a bar for Primus position, and so that's the position that Darrow wants, because if he can get Primus and be like last man standing out of all the houses essentially, he'll get his pick of which house he is apprenticed to. And he, of course, wants to be apprenticed to Nero Augustus, who is the one that ordered the death of his wife Io so that he can get his revenge. One other character that I'm super curious about is Octavia Alun. She was introduced very, very early on and only mentioned a couple times in the book, but she is the aging sovereign of the society, and she's the one that's always on the holocan talking about duty and sacrifice and how their blood and tears are going to be, you know, what helps mankind colonize the stars type of thing, and why their rules are so important and blah, blah, blah. She's like very much this propaganda head. But they also describe her as being this sovereign for the society. So I'm like, is she the big bad? Is Nero too obvious? So I'm really wondering, with 2 more books to go, you know, where that's going to lead to, because we know nothing about her at this point. But anyway, like back to the tactics and strategy part, this was one of the most interesting parts to me, because I've read the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang, and honestly, part of the first book and the second book was all like tactics and strategy stuff, and parts of that bored me to tears. But Red Rising had me so invested in what was happening between these characters and houses, and I wanted to just know like who was going to be alive by the end of it. And so they were so interesting. Like each situation was so unique in its own way with its own challenges. We see how Darrow fumbles being a leader. He goes about it the completely wrong way, where he's garnering no respect for him and still slaving people to him. And then by the end of it, he's giving people the choice and kind of ruling from like a servant leadership type of thing. There's a scene where he makes Pax whip him because Tactus tried raping another character. Darrow's solution to that was he was going to be whipped along with Tactus. He kind of gets that servant leadership kind of respect from everybody. He's down in the weeds with everyone. They see that. Instead of having to slave people to him, then he's able to get people to join his side just based on who he is. So that was really rewarding to see. I also really loved Mustang. I mean, it was obvious from the very first time that he saw her, when they kind of crossed paths on when he was training with Mateo on horseback, that she was going to become like a bigger character to him. But I loved Mustang. I did not see the twist coming. Like, I thought she was in some way related, or, you know, maybe an ex-lover or something of the Jackal, but I didn't expect her to be like the twin sister. It's interesting to compare her to her brother, because the Jackal was such a creepy character. He's this very blonde, almost pretty petite, kind of scrawny kid who lacks any kind of remorse. He is very psychopathic in a way, whereas Mustang actually has a lot of empathy. She's able to put herself in other people's shoes and kind of see from their perspective. And as a gold, she is an outlier, I would say, because she does think of things from other people's perspective and what would make them suffer and that kind of thing. So she's the very opposite of her brother in that way. There was even a part, I just loved how Pierce Brown wrote different things. Even the romance as it's blooming between Mustang and Darrow, especially when Mustang was sick and it was like winter time and they're in the cave together. Page 274 to 275, there was this winter-spring parallel between Darrow and Mustang, and it says, "She is something new, something hopeful, like spring to my deep winter." And then on the next page, like the 5th verse of the death song, it says, my love, remember the cries when winter died for spring skies." So it just keeps comparing Mustang to spring, and Darrow and Io, really, his life before is basically being this deep winter. And so I just like the writing like that. The writing was very snappy and quick-paced. You had a lot of kind of very abrupt, broken sentences, like very choppy in a way. And I think that helped with the pacing of the book and just made things seem like so dire and like things were happening very fast. Another character that I adored was Sevro. I did a complete 180 on his character. I thought he was going to be this monster because there are so many monsters in this series, or this book at least. And Sevro ended up being one of the most enjoyable, also offering a levity that was very much needed in the darkness of the story. So Sevro, the twist about him being the one that killed Priam, who was like favored to be the Primus that came out of all this, and him having killed Priam, and Sevro is like this little, unfortunate looking kind of goblin of a man. I think Goblin was his nickname. I love Sevro. There were so many scenes that he had me laughing, and the second twist being that Fitchner was his father, and it was just really cool seeing their dynamic. There was a scene when Apollo visited Darrow and crew, And so they're in this very sound insulated bubble. And Sevro gets up and kind of belches and, pats his big pooch belly and is like, I'm going to go take a piss, and walks out. And it's just like, how he carries himself is so funny. And the Howlers, like his group that also kind of run the woods, the forests with him, wearing these wolf pelts, they were one of the best parts about this book too. And just some of the war tactics too, like when they partnered up with Diana to take down Minerva and Mustang, and they had the Howlers and some of Diana's crew inside the sewn up bellies of these horse corpses on the killing field outside of Minerva. It was just so perfect, just like that. And then even a lot of the use of the technology, like the grav boots, how it turns out that the rings that everyone was wearing were not only like a kind of tracking device, but like a camera. So very Hunger Games, like being able to watch people on camera. That was like a really cool reveal to me. And then of course the Jackal scene was just a standout scene to me. I think his reaction to being found out was very eerie. He had no qualms about chopping his own hand off and getting the hell out of there. He was just a really creepy guy. Like, he operated at a very detached, purely logical place, very different from how Mustang would carry herself, and it was just so creepy. It made him a really compelling villain, and I think so many characters in this book made really excellent villains because there was some small part of them that was kind of likable, whether it was like their sense of humor or, just people that they hated. There was just like a really great balance of gray area with each of these people, whether they're villains or heroes or not. And it just made all of the characters, even the side characters that just got very little page time. Like, for example, Tamara. Tamara died very early. You don't see that much of her. Tactus, sabotaged her saddle, ended up trampling her to death just for the fact that she backstabbed Darrow. I mean, it's just small things like that that make you instantly just gravitate or hate these characters, and I think that's really great character writing. There was this scene that reminded me of something that would be in Troy or something, and it's the scene where Pax and Darrow are kind of running at the vanguard, and Pax stops, and Darrow runs up him like a ramp and leaps off of him, lands, and just takes out immediately a number of their adversaries and just kicks ass. And I thought that was a very cool action scene, how it was written. Like, I could see it play out in my mind so clearly, as was the takeover of Olympus. Just having them get a hold of some grav boots, shuttle their soldiers up to the mountain, and taking over that and beating ass and doing everything that they could there. That was really cool too. Like I said, it was just a really great blend of science fiction and fantasy. I have not ever read anything quite like that before, so it offered a really nuanced perspective on the genre for me in that sense. But what I really just enjoyed about this book was, despite us following a 16-year-old at the start of the book, this book did not pull its punches for how dark and visceral it was, because bad things happened to everyone in this book series and it never shied away from it, and I just really like that about the book. It kind of reminded me of the brutality of like Ender's Game. I remember the children in that book being very, very young. Like, Ender was very young, but some of the things that they did against each other were horrible, just very violent and awful. And then some of the twists and reveals around the training and stuff was very much similar to Red Rising, and I just enjoyed that aspect a lot. But anyway, by the end of this book, when Darrow basically rallied everyone around him and he earns Primus spot and he's facing his arch enemy, that was so cool to me. I got chills with him kneeling at Nero's feet and accepting the apprenticeship. I don't know how the next book can possibly top everything that happened in this book. It was just, everything was so breakneck speed and just so at the umpteenth power the whole time. I loved everything about this book, and I couldn't get enough, couldn't put it down. I would recommend anyone read this book. I've mentioned some of the content trigger warnings, whatever, so unless that bothers you, I would wholeheartedly just read this book. And I just know that as soon as I pick up Golden Sun, it's going to be the same situation where I'm just like, not able to function in my daily life, blocking everything out just to read this book. I don't know how Pierce Brown can top himself, but I am curious to see how he does it. So if you have read Red Rising, definitely let me know what you thought of the book and what some of your favorite scenes were. If you enjoyed my little discussion about Red Rising, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you made it this far in the video, go ahead and drop me like a wing emoji. Like that little wing emoji because it fits. I plan to do reviews for Golden Sun and Morning Star in the future, so I will be reading those in very short order. So, alright, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!